It's good.
Did you set the record? I didn't hear the lady say anything.
I thought he did.
A couple ladies.
Yeah.
So I hit the mark, and I said,
Yeah.
No, you are recorded. That makes me think.
oh,
Yeah.
I have my volume.
No, you're all good. Okay. Let's just make sure we're all good. Yeah, I think you're good.
You did it. Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. And if we want to rise for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Entertain a motion regarding the approval of the agenda for the workshop.
I'll move to approve the agenda as posted.
Motion in a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Moving into the continuous improvement plan workshop. I see there were, looks like the metrics and the narrative were updated.
I don't know if we updated the narrative.
Or
Did we?
Yeah, the only thing we took out of the narrative were threat
Oh,
roll
that's right, we're using that program.
and Patty's name.
But the overall
Yep.
message has not changed.
Right.
so
The go-on rate numbers have been adjusted because we have an email from the state letting us know that they inadvertently put wrong numbers on the website where we get our go-on rate numbers. So, Chris had to go on and get our accurate numbers and put this in. So
okay.
it's changed.
So what numbers do we use for that? Do we use the 1 year or the 2 year numbers that we gather?
I think we have to report both.
Both of them?
Yeah, the 1 year go-on and the 2. I think we report those by cohort.
Yeah. At least that's the way the state has this.
We did update those goals that you asked us to separate out in the metrics. We added those.
Recording in progress.
Figure that out.
So a lot of these are just things that the state uses to measure, but what we talked about last time was that they're not a very effective measurement. So it would make sense to me that we put in there what the state is requiring us to put in, and then we go ahead and find a more effective way of measuring this. Since this is a goal, it doesn't really make sense to put it in a tool. This isn't a proper measurement tool in effect to measure something. So maybe my suggestion would be to kind of brainstorm for some measurement tools that might be effective and add that as, I don't know if it would need to be an addendum. I don't know how we would do that, make that as part of our little continuous improvement plan.
So we could do that. This plan, the way that the state has it put together, is pretty specific. So you have the graduation and the go-on type information and then the state assessment via the ISAT. And then they have the literacy part, which is your IRI and those kinds of things. And then you have your college and career things. So even to put in, I think from math, have to go back and look. I don't remember if we got to add an optional metric at the bottom of where the ISATs are, but that's where a math goal would be appropriate. The only place I remember putting optional were in the literacy and in the goal and in the college and career ready. So another way that we could look at it, because we have talked about coming back together and actually putting together our strategic plan. This could be a link into that plan with additional goals that make sense to us as far as how we're going to measure our academic progress.
And that's kind of what I was thinking, like an addendum or an amendment, or not that it would get sent in with the state, but this would be a personal
For
goals.
our,
Yeah.
Just because I think that really is nonsense to, measure something with a ruler that's wrong.
Or we need to find a way to measure it. I don't think we throw it out. I think we need to find a way to measure it. And if we don't have a standardized way of measuring in the district, then that's something we need to figure out why. Why is there not something that we can collectively say, here's third grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, whatever, because the intent by the legislature, if you look at the bill itself, and if you, there's also direction from the State Board of Education. If you go to their website, they have huge, everything about all the changes, what's expected, what's not expected. There's a checklist you can go through and look at everything, but if you look at the intent, because I pulled the bill, and I did call Mr. Vishnetsky, but I interrupted a personal chore. So I went to find it myself. He sits on the education committee because I wanted somebody to explain to me what the intent of the legislature was, and I apologize, I just had it carried. So it was House Bill 0222 of this past legislative session. And you probably Google it and find it, but it says, in this bill, they eliminated some things that they thought were non-value added activities associated with K through 12, including reports and unnecessary bureaucracy. It drives effectiveness, and this is what was implemented, and this is the language of the bill that they submitted. It drives effectiveness in the aspects of school that Idaho citizens are primarily interested in, and that is, and this is a quote, are more kids learning to read? Are they getting better at math? Are more industry certificates being earned in CTE programs, and so on, end quote. Additionally, this legislation sets up infrastructure so that the legislature, along with the governor's office, the state education agency, stakeholder groups can consider ways to incentivize, encourage, and recognize high-performing teachers in schools in an effort to encourage more schools to use practices that are highly successful here in Idaho. And I understand that there's this disconnect, it seems, between, the educators or the statutes themselves, maybe what their intent was and what actually came out of the legislation. But that was their intent. Their intent was to incentivize, Lakeland's always saying, hey, we're at the top or whatever, was to incentivize those, that were effective. And what are they doing to be effective? How are they getting effective? So what can we find within the district to prove our effectiveness? And it might be, I know Dr. Meyer says constantly, that the state was interested in our Charlotte Danielson model. They were interested in, how we do this, that, or whatever. So what is it that we can look to say, here's our measurement, here's how we continue to beat the statistics or the percentages or whatever, in what we're currently doing. Now, it is hard if across the grade band that we have being standardized, in my head, that's a problem. How does the board know, that we're even meeting the goal? I mean, not that I doubt the teachers or doubt what they're doing or any of those, but even how does I know that the teachers can look at, their little individual class or classes, or, they get to know the student and they can pretty much tell if someone's.
If this measurement isn't working,
Right.
how do we measure? How
Right.
do we show
Right.
it?
Right.
Yes, and I think that's.
Yeah. And if their intent truly was to say, hey, here's the shining example, this is working, how can we meet that? How can we show that? And I know we did a huge switch with math and how we were measuring, from the high station to the iReady, and it all sort of came at a weird time with COVID and all that, but I feel like the board has an obligation to come up with something.
And we do have the standardized assessments, the iReady assessment, we can use K-8, it's a K-8 tool, but we also are using it at the high school level for our at-risk kids who are not at grade level in math. So we're continuing, so they will take the diagnostic, those identified students. So we have that for both math and ELA, and it is standardized and nationally normed. So we could use that, which I think we actually put into the plan. So under literacy, the optional assessment that we recommended was iReady. Because that is a tool that the board has purchased for us to use, and it is standardized.
And honestly, that was our push, because as a building principal, that has always been our struggle of how, if there's another building doing something really great, like how do we have the narrative, the and the qualitative story of what's happening, and then how do you replicate that if it's working?
Right.
We haven't had that ability of not having norms. Like, people have their formative assessments, people have their summative measures, but if we're not all doing the same, if it's not all standardized in implementation, if it's not normed, like how are we doing nationally? We've struggled with being able to have those conversations. So that was really our push for iReady, so that we would have some standardized measure to say, okay, at this building in third grade, so what are you doing? What are you using? What are your strategies? What, how much engagement, all of those things. You can't have those conversations if there isn't some measure that says, this is your baseline, this is your ceiling.
Right.
And that was really our push.
Yep. And I think at the same time, it's a living document, right? We can change it and add to it and update it. So maybe initially, being that we are where we are right now, and although I noticed that Coeur d'Alene won't even be reviewing theirs until October 5th, but I did go and I read Lake Pend Oreille's their last year's. I couldn't find this year's, and I looked at Post Falls, and I looked at Coeur d'Alene, I looked at Moscow, and some of the other ones, Moscow, and maybe what we do is that, I don't know if this goal goes in there or not, but I know that it was in there before, that one of the goals for the board is to make sure that we have some kind of norm established across the district, across the grade bands, right? So we can say, this is what's happening at this grade, and if it's working, why isn't it? And if it is working, let's replicate it, right? Because we only got to get it to work one time, and then you can replicate it millions of times, right? The thing is getting it to work once. So I don't know, after reading, my brain's pretty overwhelmed with everything I read. So but that was just what I wanted to know, what the intent was. What is the problem? Why we can't meet what they're asking us to meet? And that's why I went back to the intent of the bill. So, and how we get there, I don't quite have that worked out yet, other than if we start down the checklist of the State Board of Education and look at what they have, or just accept what we've been given. My only hesitation in that is I just feel bad that the numbers are so low, because I don't feel that that is the expectation of the district. I don't feel that's ever been the expectation of the district to say we're good with 40%, 30%. I cringe at that.
Right.
But that's me. You know, I just,
Because of the test, because the test is faulty, we're gonna use that as an excuse to let the kids down and not require
Well, I don't
them what they're
yeah.
able to require because of the test. Because it's not a fair assessment of what the kids are able to do. So
right,
we're not really able to get a good snapshot
well, we
of
have
where they're
many,
at.
right, but we have many, many more, if you look at the statute. We bring up the statute, when we look at the statutes, we have much flexibility in what we can measure by.
Okay.
We are required to put the ISAT scores in there. That's a requirement.
Sure.
And when we met with the legislators who wrote the bill, they recognized that especially in math, our scores are flat on the ISAT, and we are not getting the growth. And one of their intents that they shared with us was that those optional measures are an opportunity for us to share at what we are successful with, because they are struggling a little bit with that math ISAT. So, and they wanted us to be able to share our story. So whatever we choose, to your point, we need to be able to say, look, we are doing really good things for our kids.
Right.
As far as what we put in there as a goal for iReady ELA, I mean, we could certainly put that higher. This is the first year we've given it, so we didn't. One thing they told us was that they wanted our goals to be attainable and realistic. They'd rather us say we set our goal this year for 60% and we met it, than to say we set it for 90% and we didn't meet it. Because what they want us to do is look at, okay, we met it at 60, what do we need to do to get to 70? And so it's not necessarily setting the bar low, but being realistic with it and then pushing forward is kind of what they're asking us to do as far as what we're sharing with them.
Have it ever moving.
Always moving forward instead of,
If you say 100, it just consider 100.
right, and then it looks like we're stuck, just, because we're.
And maybe we would be if the goal was 90 and we just know that we're not gonna get to that, so we just accept that rather than.
And this district has never been good at accepting anything less than 90. We always were the shining star when it came to ISAT scores before they did whatever they did with this test that has just thrown everybody for a loop. And again, to Ramona's point, they're looking at what is working and how do we replicate it, but even the legislators admitted that right now in math, if you look at the scores, nothing appears to be working because we're all in the same place. There isn't a school out there that's scoring 90% in math or even 80% in math because, so that's the quandary. And so whatever we put in as our optional, we just want to make sure that we're setting the goal where we feel comfortable. And if you want us to move it up, we certainly can do that.
But I think if it can't be moved because of everything we explained, I think the narrative needs to explain why it's where it's at. It's half of last year because everything's new this year, right? And I think we need to explain that so that it's written down somewhere, because as it is now, it just looks like,
And I felt like when we said in that training, it really talked about in the past, it's just been that quantitative, it's just the meat and potatoes of numbers. And there had to be some way to tell the story. And so they wanted some of that qualitative piece put back in there of just like, tell us where you are and what you're trying to get to, what you're trying to achieve. I mean, we talked a lot about, we have ISATs, that's a requirement, but wanting these different measures so we have a preponderance of evidence. So it's not, to Debbie's point, it's not, we can write this test off and so we stay at 60 and we're fine with that. We have multiple measures to say, okay, we are consistently, this is a trend line and we're consistently in third grade following in this. So what's going on? Is it a curriculum problem? Is it an instructional problem? Is it an engagement problem? Like what's the issue so that we are removing those barriers and continuing on that hill trajectory? But if we don't have it, just having one measure is never going to give us that story because it's easy to write that test off. You know what I mean? Versus if I have 3 or 4 measures that say, okay, there's trends here. What are we doing? what's working, what's not. And so that really, I mean, if we wanted this to be a living, clean document, in my opinion, that would be the goal, is we're looking at, you know, multiple pieces to make those, to find those trends, not just numbers.
Well, I would like to point out, thank you for updating the numbers. One segment was missed. It was the proficiency on the kindergarten through third grade spring IRI. This is what's on our website. These numbers should have been put here, and it looks like these numbers were put there. So it should say kindergarten should be 73.5, not 100%.
Can we see it up here so all of us can see what you're
Are
looking
you
at?
looking like on the website where it's on the
This is-
tab?
Yes,
Okay.
this is what we have on the website.
I don't think anyone can reach the mouse.
Oh. Oh, that's it. I could have opened it. I didn't realize it was over here. I would have opened it up.
Thank you. Okay, so.
But some of the other, I did look at some of the other ones in there.
So what you're looking at, let's see, it is, sorry, we gotta do a lot of scrolling.
In the yellow, there we are, that yellow. On the current, on the new, the SIP plan, the percent of students who proficient in spring IRI, we have listed 100%. But on here, it's 73.5%.
That was benchmark, so is the 73.5 actual?
No, I get it, but it says performance target. So that's where I'm for 2021. So because they've taken off benchmarks on the whole document and turned it all to performance, which performance targets is listed. And when I go through and I compare the numbers with the 2021 and all the other columns, they are correct. This one section, it looks like may have gotten just oversighted. Yeah, well, just pulled from the wrong column because we pulled from the 2019-20.
So what did we put for the 21, 22 benchmarks?
We put 70%. So we would be dropping
We would
from
be going
73.5 to
Yeah,
70.
we don't want to do that, we should be going up.
And then on the grade 1, it was 72.8, and we're dropping to 70.
Yep.
On grade 2, it was 78.5, we're dropping to 73. In grade 3, we're at 78.1, but we're dropping down to 70. Or we're dropping to 75. And then for grade 4, because there was no measure, we're dropping all the way down to 55%. Which I don't.
And that was based on their 4th grade ELA proficiency last spring.
Okay.
That's because it's the first time we've ever had that measure on this measure.
Okay. Oh, and that's ISET. It's
It's
not
ISET.
IRI. But
And all of those numbers are on the report card report. Is that where they're taken from? Because we have to include that too, right? As a piece of the new SIP.
Yeah, the report, you have to have a direct link at the
Yeah.
very top of it.
Right, right.
So we missed that when we fix those numbers
Yeah.
and make sure that we're at,
Okay.
they're actually going up.
Can you fix it? Because this is the live document. So tell me what.
so kindergarten 73.5.
So we want that to go up.
Well, under the 2020-21, that was 73.5.
That was our target or that was our actual?
Because this is a target,
This is
what
the
we showed
target,
is a
not
target.
their actual percentage of proficiency.
So I wonder if our target last year was 100.
It says performance targets.
We did
Previously
73.5.
It's 73.5. And then for grade 1, it was 72.8.
What did you can go up from that and then, right, nope. Tell me. Nope. The zeros, right under data tool.
The point
There's
zero,
the point zero up there.
see the arrows
Right,
underneath
yes,
the zeros?
Right, nope, yep, right, thank you. There you go. Sorry.
Good job. Snap.
Right there.
So the second grade is 78.5. And then third grade was 78.1.
So the 21-22 performance targets are based on where we actually ended last spring.
Okay.
And we added a few percentage points to each of those.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, if we were below our target, then it would seem reasonable to take where we were and go with that. It's just a bummer that our targets were so off base, which, I mean, obviously not astronomical, but.
so we can make those performance targets whatever you guys want.
Well, do you think there's any chance of being able to obtain the 73.5 or, I mean, to meet the goals that we previously set? Or, I mean, not knowing how far off the kids were to the marks that they previously had, I don't want to set the bar, I mean, beyond reachable.
Yeah, I don't think we increased anything by more than maybe 2.5 percentage points. So we went through, kind of basically rounded up.
Right.
So we could say, I can tell you that every single kindergarten teacher's goal is 100%.
Oh, I imagine.
So if we set it at 73.5, so they're at least equal, it doesn't look like we're planning on taking a step backward. We just push for that. All of our buildings are working on individual learning plans for kids and making sure that they're getting assistance. The kindergarten one is I think challenging just because it's all on the computer, so it's not just their reading really.
And there's a narrative that goes along with this too, so we could even explain why we did it.
The narrative actually doesn't address any of that. The narrative is completely different.
Okay.
There is a notes section on here, I think down toward the bottom, where we could put an explanation about some of our thinking about how we set the metrics. If you guys wanted that, I definitely feel like if we're going to move forward with the strategic plan, and this is going to be one of the links under student achievement, that we can really hit our thoughts about what's in here in that plan for our patrons, so they understand our thinking.
In what portion are we talking about? But in that, because doesn't each portion have the little notes area, the narrative section underneath of it?
I thought too. No.
We were told that we can either put a narrative or we can put a metric. And we put a metric, but we were told not to do both.
And my understanding was the narrative was just what you're doing, not really an explanation of why you're doing it. Just
Or an
you would be
explanation
saying,
of how
I'm
you
using first grade, spring higher I, and this is the score, not necessarily the why.
There's a note section at the very bottom where we could put some language about why it looks like, why we're setting our targets, where we're setting them for this year, and why it looks so different from how we've done it in the past. If we wanted to put it there. Just the way they put this tool together is a little bit kind of ties your hands a little bit on how you share your information. Would the board feel better about these goals if they at least matched what the goals were last year, since I think we were fairly close, or at least all 4 of the primary grades within a couple percentage points, so I don't think it would be an insurmountable
attached.
It's not looking great to go down.
I'd rather keep it up. I mean, I'd rather keep it where they were last year. And I mean,
And
okay, we
celebrate
fell a
making
little,
it
yeah, we
celebrate
fell
higher.
a little short, and but we're keeping that same target, and we're gonna do a little more, or a lot more, or whatever, to get to that, you know.
I don't know if this would be something that we might want to consider putting in here, but kind of going back to what Trustee Grissom was saying with regard to really monitoring student growth. Our old IRI, which they call the legacy IRI, really focused on oral reading fluency, which basically shows you whether kids can put all of those discrete reading skills together and fluently read. That is not presented at all in this new IRI. In fact, their oral reading fluency is a closed maze passage where they just,
It's a missing item passage.
yeah, so you just click a word, so they could
There's
literally
not, you
just
don't
guess
ever
it.
get to read, Tim, you never just get to listen to them read and hear kind of those ups and downs. It is, I mean, it's computerized.
But our grade levels, first through third, have continued as a quarterly benchmark to use an agreed upon text where they are doing oral reading fluency. And that when you talk about the preponderance of evidence, that's one piece of evidence that they really hang their hat on with regard to how well our kids reading. Because this, and it doesn't always match with how they do on this IRI. Because of the way they're tested, but when you actually ask them to put it all together and read, that's where the rubber hits the road. So that's a measure that we could use to help tell our story.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. So, all of these newer tests, the IRI and stuff through the state are all computerized. There's no. And how much, not involvement, that's not the word I'm looking for, but how much does the teacher participate in nothing? It's just like, here you go, have fun.
Well, the teachers used to be able to be the proctor for the
Yeah,
IRI in the
yeah.
classroom. We just found out this year they're not going to be allowed to do that. So you're going to take your sweet little 5-year-olds who don't really know their way around a computer, and they're going to have to be in a room with somebody not their teacher.
They just changed it again?
They just
Why did they
changed
just change it again?
I don't have any idea, but the new rule just came out, so.
And they just went back last year to let us, the year before they didn't let us, the year before they didn't, for several years let us, so it's gone back and forth now, that's 4 years in a row.
But
And
basically, when you start that test, you're not,
Yeah.
teachers are
Yeah.
not.
the other really bad thing is that you don't have the person you trust in there.
Right.
They were thinking that they were cheating, that people were cheating. But the other piece is you don't have instant results, which is why we're saying that it's so detrimental for actual instruction at the time. It's a summative that comes after the kids are already done, gone for the year, which is not helpful at all to the teachers. You used to at least get a score
At all.
that it used to come up and you could motivate them and say, oh, look at how you grew, Johnny, look at that. And everyone would be, and now there's no, and then Superintendent Guevara took away any, you don't even have to take it to graduate, so nobody at the high school, very few kids at the high school level give their best because it's not attached to the outcome at all for them. They don't see the real relevance, and then they don't have the score, so you're missing out on all those counts, so.
It used to be with the other ISAT, the kids would take their language usage ISAT, and immediately it would pop up and it would show they were advanced or proficient, and we would celebrate with them. And so then they walked out of that room knowing that I put my best into that test, and it worked, and I got the score that I wanted. So when they came in to do their reading ISAT, they were motivated to work that hard. This one now for everybody but the science grades, which are 5th and 8th and then 11th, they have 4 long, hairy ISAT tests with 0 response about how they did. So by the time they get to the 4th one, they're completely mentally exhausted.
exhausted, and they don't even know if their hard work matters. There's not even any feedback on that. At least you get rejuvenated by the end if you're like, wow, you know, but they're just blah, blah. Right, and then for the 5th and 8th graders, they have a whole other test that they get to take on top of the other.
So
Okay.
that, I mean, honestly, from a building principal standpoint, that's why we were so grateful when you guys gave us permission to do our writing, because it's a standardized one test. So we have something that is giving us immediate feedback. We can do goal setting attached to it. The kids can look at their own graphs. They can set their own goals. It is tailored to individualized instruction because it's adaptive.
So you growth all year long.
Right, so because otherwise we don't really have that tool. I will say ISIT does, there's certain portions of ISIT, there's little factions of the test, depending on, again, it's adaptive as well. So some kids bump all the way through, and then other people have different parts. After each section, it will give you kind of a graph. So the kids take it monthly, it's about 30 to 40 minutes, and so it will show that your graph is going up. So you'll see kind of that trajectory, and you can do a little bit, but the teachers aren't allowed to do any instruction attached to it. So they see that graph, and so then you just know, okay, if it was alphabetical principle and that was the one area, then the teacher knows I'm going to do something around alphabetical principle, but I don't really know what they missed on this particular test. I just know it's that broad category. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it does give you a little bit, which is more than ISAT.
Yeah, so what are we doing for math then? And this, the iReady, yeah. So within the district, if we're using, so it's iReady also is math and, okay.
It's both.
Yeah.
They actually have different names, like reading is magnetic reading, but it's all under the umbrella of iReady. So we call it already iReady because at 3rd grade it's called, I don't know. So I don't know all the little names to make it fun for each little grade.
We just implemented the iReady math this year, correct?
Well, we used it last year, the diagnostic.
We used
method.
none of the, we didn't have any of the teaching
Right.
portion of it. So
Right.
this year we have all of it, reading, writing, and math. So they offer a writing program, which we haven't had for 2nd through 5th grade. Thus far, everybody is really liking that. So we have access to their teacher toolbox. We have access to their diagnostic, all their assessments, their computerized adaptive portion, and then there are teacher lessons as well that are all attached to it that are tied back to their pacing guide and back to the diagnostic. So you really can, drill down if a student is missing something on the diagnostic. It tells you exactly which standard is missing, and it gives you lessons to support them. It gives you even those prerequisite skills. So if it's a 3rd grader and they're all the way down in 1st grade struggling, it will give you that trajectory so that you can scaffold up. So it's just all set there, so you know exactly what to teach to support closing that gap for that specific deficit.
Right. BOAC, what grade levels does that cover?
Up to 40 years old.
Yeah.
It works with everybody. The program itself has a first, well, it's got what they call KWAC, which is really just the letter sound cards. And then starting 1st grade, they really hit all the phonics skills, but so 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But we're using it at the junior high level with kids who didn't get the decoding skills, and those kids are growing like this. Their trajectory is almost straight up because they're going so quickly. We're implementing it at Lakeland Middle School this year, and Lakeland Middle School did it last year, and they're continuing to use it with kids they've already identified in 6th grade this year who are behind. But it's designed to teach your primary phonics skills, because we know that if a 1st grader leaves 1st grade with a strong decoding,
Right.
they're going to become really strong leaders. So that's the focus of the primary.
And do we track that anyway? Do we have any metric that we can look at, or is there any way, is there a way to, obviously not name the student, but say, we can look at this little cohort, if you will, or whomever they did this BOAC and look at, here's where they were, where they are now, here's looking for anything that we can say, look at the growth.
K through 2, I would say for sure. So like kindergarten, we use letter sound. We're definitely using curriculum-based measures, so it could be correct words per minute, so it's a read, it's a 1 minute timing, it's a fluency measure. There's formative assessments that we have that are specific to phonemes, so all of the phonemes that there's those vowel teams, all of the 6 syllable types, do they have those mastered? So can they read them in isolation as well as generalized in context? Can they read it in the sentence? Can they read it in the passage? We have sight words, so K through 2, we have that pretty dialed in. I would just say from a reading standpoint, once you hit 3rd grade, it's really hard, those word attack skills. Because now you're getting into more morphology and then where words come from, and so it's prefixes and suffixes and trying to break that down. And that's, in English language, that's so big. And so we definitely have ways of, okay, we teach this in 4th grade, so these are the stems that they know. It's much harder to then see how we can do the correct words per minute, how are they reading it, but are they generalizing, and then maintenance of those? So in 5th grade, do they still understand what the stems are? And the point of teaching that is when they come across a new word and it's a multisyllabic word, can they break that word apart into chunkable, achievable parts? But they have to understand what each of those parts are. So, and I just, from a reading standpoint, I don't feel like there's a lot of great programs out there that either teach just that in isolation, so that it's not generalized in context, or it's just, back to whole reading, and it's just reading, but then you're having to arbitrarily, every single word is an unknown word, and how do you merge those two together?
So many sight words.
Right, so they have it really dialed in for K through 2, and a lot of the comprehensive, like when you had journeys and some of those programs, I personally did not feel like they did it really well, so the teachers were definitely having to supplement, because you look at science words, social studies words, they're multisyllabic and they're hard. And so if you can't teach the front end and the back end and what that base word is, the kids are struggling. And so then they just supplant it with, okay, this is an S word, so I'm going to supplant it with every S word I know,
Right.
And so then that's going to impact meaning. So, BOAC does a really good job of doing it. There's a few other programs. Anita Archer has a lot of programs out there around word attack skills and that kind of a thing. But it's definitely, that's when we talk about having to supplement. We can have a really good comprehensive reading program at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade that will give us really good, literature, nonfiction, all of those pieces. It will give us great vocabulary. We can have some spelling pieces, but it always seems like those word attack pieces are pretty limited in focus. And so for what our kids have to read and what they're faced with, it's not enough. We always have to supplement there.
So that sounds like something we need to measure across the district, and if it's an issue, we need to fix it, because if they can't read, and if they can't figure out how to read it, they can't do anything.
Right.
Interesting.
You're just dead in the water.
Yeah, so she's asking you, what I hear her asking you is, what do we want to measure with BOAC?
Yeah.
What would you
Yeah,
suggest?
or
we
how,
measure?
and how can we attack that? Because in my brain, that's a big thing that needs to be, in my schooling my own kids, that was a thing, and they'll tell you they hated the curriculum because I just pushed it, but they were fluent readers by the time they were out of 1st grade, because I was just so adamant. If you can't figure it out, you can't get anywhere. You have to be able to read to comprehend, and if your
brain can only do
Right.
one thing at a time, so
Right.
they're sound by sound, sounding out.
right,
There's absolutely no comprehension happening.
Right.
And we have to equip them. So one of the things that I started working on over the summer, of just because this has been what you are, when Becky said you're speaking my language, our language, like we've been saying this for a long time, that's really why we wanted that norm standardized, because that gives you the generalization piece. So this is holistically the big picture, what you need to show mastery on. Then how do we break those standards down into achievable things that all of our kids, whether you are a really high learner or you're a struggling learner, like what are those achievable chunks so we can see growth? So we started this kind of, okay, in kinder, in September, these are the things that standardized we're all doing. But then are there formative assessments? So like in 4th grade, these are the 10 stems that we're going to teach, and these are the formative measures that we're going to give kids. So this is maybe an isolated test, and this is a generalized test in a sentence and a paragraph that we're having everybody do. So again, it's just a way of us watching. These are the things that we're saying are super important. In some of the assessments that we've had, it's, people just, I'm teaching stems, but I'm a 4th grade teacher and I teach these 10, you teach these 10. And so there's really no way that we can dial that in and go, okay, what are we really mastering? So how do we make that And so I'm trying to make, and obviously when we start having teacher collaboration, we're gonna try to get feedback on all of that. But our goal, and I think at least for elementary, all of us would want that of, okay, these in fourth grade, these are the 10 things we want to accomplish. These are our mastery standards, but these are the chunkable assessments that we can give. So we really can watch, are our kids making the gains that we want? And can they generalize it on a standardized test? Because if they have the content, it shouldn't matter what the test is.
Right.
And so are we doing all of those pieces to set them up for the most success?
Yeah.
But in my opinion, that's a system. It's building the system and dialing it in so that every grade level and everybody's agreeable. This is what we all agree upon. This is what we're doing, and this is what we are. I mean, if it's every entry task, every exit ticket, like we are ensuring that the kids get these things.
Yeah, and I think the board should, I mean, I would be in favor of supporting that and using that as a measurable metric. I mean, I think it's great that our kids can read, you know, and read at their level and comprehend at their level. That would be great.
I think that oral reading fluency is going to be really important because that truly is the kids putting it all together, and the decoding is a huge part of that. The other thing that I was thinking is to my knowledge, there isn't a national norm standardized assessment specifically for phonics and decoding. But at our first and second grade for sure, they have really dialed in at their end of quarter benchmarks. For first grade, they have on the report card, there's a grade that's given that says uses phonics to read, and their assessments are dialed into these are the phonics skills that we taught this year, and it's a down and dirty quick assessment that all of the kids take where they demonstrate their mastery of the skills that were taught that semester or that quarter. We could definitely use those
There are
benchmarks.
several published, I don't think they're normed, but there's several published like quick phonics screeners that will kind of give you that trajectory of holistic phonics from start to finish. It gets into multisyllabic, but it's not going to be deep into multisyllabic because that's kind of at the end of the road because then that's fast. But that's another one. So it's a publishing companies that put these
And
together.
core
So
has a phonics
there's
screener
several
also.
of them out there. So that could start it, and we could have, okay, K through 2 is going to do this, or even
Like
K
a
through
pre
3.
and a post test before at the end of the year.
I mean, the district can do whatever it needs to do to make sure that the district is hitting where the district wants to be, right? So when it comes to the SIP plan, is there anything happening within the district? Here's my thing is I know it's a living document because they changed it all. And it doesn't sound like anybody's really happy with having to do this 30, 40%, 50%, whatever it is. But at the same time, I don't want to continue to update the document too much to where it causes more pressure on the student or the teacher, right? Because what happens is when the board updates the document, then the pressure is felt to, teach to the test, so to speak, right? And that would not be my intention. My intention would be to sort of figure it out where we go, but I'm not, I guess I'll do whatever the board would like to do, but I am not comfortable being so low. To me, that's like, that just can't be our focus.
I think you guys want what we all want. We want readers,
Yeah.
we want mathematicians, we want them to be able to be given something and they're successfully equipped to
Right.
handle it, whatever that may be, whatever test we
Right.
give them. That's
Right.
all of our goal.
Right, yeah, absolutely, yeah, I agree.
So are you saying that you want to we have to keep this for the state, but you want to put in a growth goal so you can show that all the students are growing?
Yes,
Is that
yes,
what
yeah, absolutely. And maybe we come back to this after we get a little bit more under our feet, maybe look at what the other districts sort of, right? Because right now, nobody has anything published. Everything out there is still last year's and people are trying to figure it out and, how do we measure it kind of thing. The other thing, just because where my brain is that I don't want, which we're always going to have those people, but I really don't want the public to look at this this document and say, oh, look what this board's happy with, 30%, they're great. You know, we hear the same narrative all the time about Idaho's education and all that, and really, if they ignored the propaganda, and they went and they looked at Montana, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and they compared the tests, they're all about the same. They barely move from each other.
Right, because we're all using the same
Right.
test.
Right, exactly. So it can't just be just Idaho.
It's
Right.
really not, it's not the kids,
Right.
or even the teachers.
Right,
Because if it was, we would have these pockets of sunshine where people have figured it out.
Right,
We don't have pockets of sunshine
Right.
right now. We have been at the same, I mean, every.
It's like in this test,
Right.
that's what she means.
Yes.
Right,
Yes, that's
specific
what
to
she-
this test.
right,
I mean, when we get a class who scores 60% proficient or 65% one class, we're doing happy dance. Like, yes, we broke out of the 50s.
isn't that?
But,
Well, and
and
teachers are
that,
calling that teacher, what did you do, what'd you use, what, because it's, everyone is just,
So,
yeah,
yes.
this is awesome.
So there's an issue with the test, but I will also tell you that, we're doing our math pilot, and we've gotten some really good math professional development. And at our last training with the iReady people, she shared something that I've known and I've been talking with teachers about for a while, but it was good. Sometimes you can't be a prophet in your own village, right? So, she shared with them that the math standards changed in 2010. That's when the Common Core came out and all that stuff. They changed in 2010. The textbooks all did this huge rush to try to say, oh, pick us because we're aligned to the new standards. Well, they didn't change anything about how the instruction was delivered, what the textbook looked like. All they did was they went into the new standards and then identified, okay, this lesson kind of deals with this standard, so we're going to align it to that standard. They just showed all the standards were in there. And what she said was, now you guys are in the process of adopting the new textbook. You're not going to find a textbook that looks like the ones that we used to have. Because the reason our kids are not doing well on our tests is because the textbook didn't change and the instruction didn't change. And now that the textbooks have changed, they are forcing teachers out of their comfort zone to teach it differently, which makes parents uncomfortable a little bit because they don't understand what we're doing in the classroom and they don't know how to support kids at home. So we might start to see some improvement in math, but it takes the teachers really getting out of where they've always been. It's how, what we know as educators is what was taught to us.
Right.
So they're having to unlearn what they've always known about math and relearn it so that they can teach it to the kids. And so the textbook has not supported that because it was the old textbook the way they've always been written. Our new textbooks are supporting that. Like the design of the lesson is truly, here's a problem. The kids are going to work together in their groups to tackle it and figure out what strategies can we use to solve this problem. And 4 different groups might use 4 different strategies, and they're going to share those strategies with each other. And it's all about mathematical thinking, problem solving, critical thinking. So it could be that it changes. We start to see a little movement on the math ISAT in the next couple of years as teachers and kids get comfortable with this. Because I think that's been the disconnect, is that the test is assessing student learning in a way we've never done. And because our teachers have never been allowed to see the test, we don't. And they can use the interim assessment pieces, and they do. And they use them whole groups, so they'll put the problem up and then they work through together. How would you solve this if this was your problem? But when I started having critical conversations with Carla and Laraway at the State Department, one of the things she shared with me, because I said, all of our teachers are using this, and you keep telling us that this is a tool you need to use. Well, they all are using it, and our scores are not changing. So what's the disconnect? Okay, she said, well, all of the interim assessment tools are at a depth of knowledge 1 or 2, so it's basic computation. The ISAT is depth of knowledge 3 and 4. So our kids, so the kids and the teachers, nobody gets to sit
Everybody's
on
at a
their
disadvantage. Yeah.
And so when I explained to them at the State Department that if I had a teacher in the classroom who never looked at the test until they got to the test at the end of the chapter, and then they gave it to the kids, and the kids were failing because the teacher hadn't taught at a mastery level if they needed to know. I would be having a conversation with the teacher. That's bad teaching,
Right.
and that's what you're doing to us.
Yeah.
So we continue to work with them, but I just want you to know that maybe we'll see a little bit of growth in that as we use these new tools. But I think it's gonna take a couple of years.
So what math are we piloting?
The elementary level, that's really iReady, some illustrative math, and then our own recap.
She's doing an update for you on Thursday.
Oh,
morning meeting.
Okay.
So
All
she'll
right.
have the K-5 and the
Okay,
6th grade
perfect.
on Thursday
Okay.
for you guys.
Yeah.
And well, it'll be in the board thing tonight. You can look at it.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
yeah, at the middle of them, there are 3 different. There's one program that we're looking at, K-8, and then the 6th, 7th, and 8th are looking at 2 other programs.
And then what about the piece for the staff performance measurements?
So the language that I put in at the bottom, if you go to the metrics, yeah. Dr. Pasley and I actually called Allison Hankin at the State Board of Education and asked her, how in the world do we document this? Because statute allows our teachers to choose from 9 different types of, and that's the number I'm pulling out, it could be 10, could be 8, but it's several. As district approved assessments, formative assessments, teacher created assessments, the ISAT, re-post, CTE,
Performance
in
assessments.
the course assessments, I mean, they just have a plethora of them, and then for, they also could pick IEP goals or 504 goals. And then we cannot report on staff performance unless you have 5 people using the same exact assessment. So at the elementary, we kind of got away with with reporting because we have, they either used iReady math for their growth goal, or they used iSIP for reading. There were a few who used iReady, ELA. No, it was just iSIP and iReady math. But even within that, the way they wrote their goals was different, and the data that they were looking at was different. But we felt like, well, at least they're using the same tool, so we reported that this percentage of kids met their goals using iReady. At the secondary level, there weren't 5 people who used the same tool. So she asked us to put in the narrative that because of this code, the 331001, we don't have an end at the secondary level, so I cannot. And she wanted us to put that there because the legislators, they tried to give that feedback to the legislators when they were writing the new SIP bill, but it was something that they didn't really understand and so she's hoping that now it's in place and we're actually using it, that if enough districts say, well, here, we can give you elementary, but we can't do anything at secondary, and this is why, that maybe they'll come back and reword it so it makes it a little bit easier. So that's the why behind the language.
How much time do we spend on standardized testing for our kids?
Way too much. Well, 6 weeks of instructional time lost in the spring for the ISAT.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. And then
And the ISAT
Yeah, 30
But I guess
after
just
30
for clarity, it's 6 weeks in total, but so like for instance, if you're a 3rd grader, you're gonna go in for 4, 5 weeks, but it's just for 1 day. If you can get, like, so you might have a rotation where the first week you're gonna do math. There's 2 parts to math, so math 1, and then the second week you're gonna do math 2, and then the next week you're gonna do ELA 1 and ELA 2. So if you're done in that day span, so like from a scheduling standpoint, we'll put them in the computer lab, but you're in the computer lab the whole day. And if you're done, then it's just that 1 day. If you're not, then we have to, and you know, the requirement is if you're at school, if you're not done, you have to finish the test. And so for some kids, I mean, you could be in a through the lab for 2 to 3 days because it's taking them that long to get it done. Because we're giving breaks and snacks because they're overwhelmed.
But
We get lots of tears.
in addition to that, when I say 6 weeks, so if this week I'm a fourth grade teacher and my kids are taking the first part of the ELA, I'm spending a whole week getting my kids ready for ELA. So it's 6 weeks of teaching too and taking the test is how that works. And our kids are at a disadvantage because we're in North Idaho. That's the other part of this that's very frustrating for us. In Southern Idaho, they're done with school at the Friday before Memorial Day. The testing window closes basically 2 weeks before that. So they get to teach most of their school year and then they end the year with the assessment. Our testing starts at the end of third quarter. So we
haven't learned everything yet.
we only have 3/4 of a year to teach a full year of content in North Idaho.
So then teachers are scrambling.
Because
Everything revolves around
everything,
boys.
they set the schedule for
No, I
us.
know, but why isn't it just standard throughout the entire state, that the entire state
Gets this many weeks
academically
of
is focusing?
instruction. Yeah, I asked that question. Part of it is that the performance task for ELA, where they actually have to write an essay, is hand scored, and they need all of the tests down at the state level at the same time, so that they can only bring that group together once.
It'd be wonderful as school board members, you guys have a lot of weight with the legislators, school board members do. If we say something, you think we're just complaining and, they're just making excuses why their scores aren't high enough. But as a school board, that would be great. Because you guys have said things, a few things you've said, like it would be great for the school board or school boards, or we have that tomorrow night, of saying, like, can we do anything as a voice to tell the legislators why this isn't working for us, especially in North Idaho? I mean, we were told right before school started that we had to give the jump start that we did. It had to be done by September 10th. I said on the governor's thing. I don't know if anyone remembers that North Idaho, and I was a little bit sarcastic, but I don't know if anyone remembers that North Idaho is part of the state, and we started at the prettiest part of the state. I keep saying that, at least for the prettiest part of the state, but we start school on September 7th. We cannot test all of those kids in 3 days. Everybody else has been in school for a month, and they have a whole month to do that.
You have to say, welcome to school, and now you have the standardized test.
Right after, in the first 3 days with little kids at John Brown for jump start. Anyway, I'm not trying to complain, but I do think as a school board members, you guys do have more weight with the legislators than the educators do.
So in our district, we start the test, the testing window opens the week before spring break. It's the end of our third quarter. We come back from spring break and start testing. And we have to be done by May 18th-ish. And so then we have a whole month left of school, but after 6 weeks of intense testing, our kids cannot learn anything. I mean, they are fried. So
Unless you're a third grader, because then you have to do the
That's like,
IRI as well.
but then they're
So
just
third
clicking
grade
stuff
and
just
IRI.
Yeah, fourth, third grade has to do.
So
I'm sure if we dig hard, we might be able to find a couple of positive things we could say about the ISAT. But we'd have to dig. For me, the bottom line is it does not help our teachers, help our kids. And that's the part that is the most frustrating.
I don't know that we can you pull up the 33, 1001 that's there? And let's look at 18, because measurable student achievement, their definition, means the measurement of student academic achievement or growth within a given interval of instruction for those students who have been enrolled in and attended 80% of the interval of instruction, which goes against our policy, by the way. Measures and targets shall be chosen at the school level in collaboration with the staff member impacted by the measures and applicable district staff and approved by the school board. So each school does have the ability to come up with their own metric to put in the SIP plan. Measures and targets must also align with the performance measures and benchmarks in the 33-320, which you can go back and look at, And then, of course, it goes on, targets may be based on grade or department level, or growth goals collaboratively, blah, 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 but then it gives us a list. This is,
Can I just?
Yeah,
just
go
say
ahead.
something? This is not specific to the SIP tool. This statute is specific to teachers' evaluation. So when they're talking about picking a measurable student achievement, that they're by law on their evaluation, they have to have a SMART goal that is tied to student achievement. And they can only choose one of those.
maybe do
Yeah,
And
this
this
is
is
one
actually
things we're
what's
talking
on
about.
our PLP.
This is
Right.
what makes it so hard to do the staff performance report, because they get to pick from any of those. This isn't tied, this is not specifically tied to the SIP plan.
right, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Measures approved by the school measures and targets must also align with the performance measures and benchmarks in the SIP plan. But if they, at the building level, can decide, why can't we add that to our measures, right? If we don't have to have like immediately the full district wide. And 33.320, I'm not seeing that it specifically says we have to use, I mean, unless I'm wrong, can we look at 33.20? I'm not seeing where we have to use a specific plan or a specific test, sorry. It just says that.
No, we get to choose, that's why that
Okay.
optional part is in there, we get to put whatever we want in the district
Okay.
option, and we can have as many as we want.
Right.
We are tied to the required ones, which are the ISAT, all the state assessments, the ISATs, the IRIs, the go-on rate, the CTE.
Yeah, that's all
certification.
put in there, as individuals, I did see that, yeah.
Yeah, but then at the bottom of the literacy section and at the bottom of the career counseling section,
Mhm.
it says, optional or district choice, basically, we have to have at least one, you can have more than one.
That's where you guys wrote the
And
IRA.
that's where we put the iReady. And it's also where we put the FAFSA completion and the post-secondary plan and the dual credit.
Dual credits,
Yeah.
So we're looking at again at a preponderance of evidence, not based on standardized.
I think what I'm maybe sensing from trustee Grissom, so I'm doing a little perception check based on some of the things you said tonight, is what are we already doing, so we're not maybe adding more to the plates of teachers, right?
Right,
To be able as a board to monitor how our kids are doing.
right, which I think is what the
Comprehensively across.
right, which I think is what the legislature, from the intent, the statute might not have, properly been written to, say what their intent was. Yeah, but if you read the intent of what the thing was, and to their point, they're seeing 600 plus bills in 3 months and they're trying to get
And their
them all
background
done.
is not education,
Right,
most
right.
of them. Yeah. So
There were a lot of educators.
Kirby was a
Yeah.
superintendent. But
And
it's
who was the other,
Senator Lynch.
she's down
and,
south, Dark Hog or?
Oh, Danny
Oh,
Hartog.
Lori Van Hartog.
Yeah, and there was a.
Was she an educator before?
I think she had something, I might be.
Wendy
mistaken.
Foreman was a school board trustee before.
Mhm.
I didn't think Lori.
Yeah, maybe not, maybe I'm getting her confused
Oh,
with someone else.
It's the lady Jane,
Oh.
the Democrat with the gray hair.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, Jane, what's that? She's an older gal,
Yeah,
her hair is
yeah.
cut like that.
Yeah.
She was she's one of the few Democrats, that's why she stood out. Remember, Elton something, maybe it was.
yeah,
Where did
because
you
I
guys
looked,
sit down?
yeah.
It was kind of poofy on top and then it was kind of like that.
Because when I went back and I looked at the history of the bill, there was a cohesive agreement in the bill, the first time it was voted on, and then it looked like the second time it was. There was more of an agreement on the thing, so that's all I'm trying to do is make sure that, that our constituents don't think that we're just, dragging the district down, and that, at the same time that we find something we can measure So we really do know how we're growing, right? I mean, because.
Well, we know we're growing, so how do we show it?
Right.
Right.
Because we're graduating highly successful kids from our high schools, and that they are the culmination of a strong K-12 system. So, yeah, what are we
Put it
gonna,
down in concrete terms.
I really feel like we need to put our oral reading fluency scores in there for primary to really show
Yeah.
the acquisition of those
What's
skills.
I reading now, she said, and then what's the metric for BOAC?
That we're gonna use the oral reading fluency.
I would say
I think
oral
that's-
fluency and GPS.
And what?
Well, but we're not doing it. If we're not gonna ask our teachers to do
Gain
more
more
testing,
Yeah.
Definitely.
See how her hair goes.
Yeah.
but we're not doing it across the board.
Doesn't look right, she was that color.
Yeah.
If we're gonna do, I would
Yeah.
rather us use our conventional assessments that we're using.
She was a teacher.
So what do we want to do with the SIP plan then? I mean, are we good just submitting it the way it is and then coming back to it, or?
Well, I mean, the reality is if we add more testing measures to the SIP plan, we're adding more.
Yeah.
But if we have a strategic plan that's gonna identify, anyways, if we're going to have an
Visionary plan.
Yeah, there you go, I like that
That
we're gonna have a rainbow.
This is so corporate and stagnant and no emotion in it, you know?
We're gonna have a rainbow.
That's where the head hunter comes in and, you know, reorganizes things.
Strategic plan. With our
Wow,
visionary-
sorry.
Yeah, I've been through a few of them. One time I saw 15 business plans in 18 months, yeah. Anyways, sorry, I digress.
Visionary rainbow plan.
With pockets of sunshine.
Bluebirds are flying.
Yeah.
So within that, I think is where we need to lay out what we're looking at in entirety. I mean, this is obviously a statutory obligation of what we submit, and that the board has to, you know, be apprised of how we're doing, you know, in a whole picture standing, not just this one laborious evaluation that isn't very well timed for our kids or for our staff.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't have a problem with the SIP the way it stands. So as long as we as a board are gonna be more diligent at creating our visionary rainbow plan, with all the other components that need to go into it, so that the public can say, okay, here's the SIP plan, I don't like those numbers. And then we say, okay, but here is the reality. I mean, this is a statutory obligation, but this is the district as a whole. It's not just this one measure that doesn't work real well for our kids.
We want something that says, this is what we want to see versus what the state is telling us we need to say we want to see.
Yeah.
How does that get communicated?
It would
Yeah.
be,
Exactly.
yeah, so it would be really easy for Dr. Pasley and I to make sure that Dr. Meyer has for you guys, like, quarterly. We could tell you what percentage of our first graders met their oral reading fluency target.
I actually would recommend we do it kind of in grade bands and we're chunking, so like K2, because that's
Right.
similar
Right.
focus. I agree. And then 3-5, we could have a couple of measures recognizing we have iReady, we're going to have ISIP, we're going to have ISIP, so we have, or iReady, ISATs, ISIP, we'll have all of that as well, but then we have some of those district curriculum-based measures, and so we have some grade band, and we're looking at, you know, maybe it's gonna be word attack skills and comprehension, or it's gonna be vocabulary development, or whatever, and then we're just regularly, giving that to Dr. Meyer to showcase.
The other thing I think that Michelle's talking about that I feel like we've talked about that's really important, but I don't want to lose sight of is we're talking about student achievement, which is one of the 5 district goals. We have safety and security of students was number 1. We have done a lot, and we could measure the number of armed guards, the responses they're getting, calls from parents. I mean, we have things we could measure with the safety and security. We have communication with patrons, like, are we doing good enough with that? Like, how do we want to measure that? Are we doing? How can we get better?
Surveys, how many
Right,
responses to surveys?
Yeah, and is there something that we can measure with that? So, and then our financial picture is one of those 5 goals. Student achievement is one of those goals.
Right.
But then the other one that the board has always had me do since I've been here is improving. Like, one of my main jobs is supposed to be to increase the capacity of our instructional leader, which are all the principals. So how do you want to measure that for us to do that?
Yeah.
So those are other ones I just don't want to lose sight of. We have these metrics, but and also when we do the rainbow visionary deal, I want to make sure we have those other ones in there. So then that's the whole big picture for everybody.
But in parentheses and writing.
The rainbow and show it.
Yeah, and I think all of that, basically, a lot of that is in statute already as far as the board's responsibility. And I do like the grade band idea, just because in my brain, I like to see if there's a gap and how we fill the gap. Although it's a little hard because, now second became third and they're not necessarily, but, we can sort of track.
I mean, there's a way that we.
Yeah, we have it by grade and by cohort. We can show you longitudinally the same colors showing each. I mean, we do have mobility. Jake said in his building alone, 35% new families at Garwood this year. And,
Historically, I would keep for 10-25%.
Well, and recognizing from year to year, it's not always apples to apples,
Right.
but definitely from quarter to quarter.
Yeah,
right.
It is more apples to apples relatively. I mean, you have 1 or 2 kids that are shuffling through, but it's not, we get a lot of turnover and then we have a lot of new kids and that's every single year. So quarterly, we would have more, you feel like you have a better picture of that story.
Right.
And we could, rather than having it be, I don't know how you guys did Dr. Meyer's goals this year, but Dr. Pasley and I could certainly at the end of each quarter do a short update to the board on here's kind of where we are and what our data looks like. And then talk about if our data isn't where we want it to be, what are we doing in our schools to move the needle? If it is where we want it to be, what are we doing to celebrate that and keep moving? But we could certainly provide that information.
We'll do our best not to make it really long because we can talk to this today.
well, in the pilot, we were gonna do a monthly update for the board with the pilots, so that math data, as we're going, we need to be reporting that every month.
It might be something that we start moving to the website. The one thing I have enjoyed about Coeur d'Alene and some of the other districts is that every statutory obligation of the board has a place on the site, which most of it you have to by law. But they cite the statute in which they're meeting. This is here because here's the obligation of the board according to statute. Because I think that's part of what's lost in translation and why some of the public might think that the board's overstepping is because they're not understanding that statutorily we are obligated for those things. And that would be good because there is a place, I know it was used for kindergarten, but there was a link there under the board's place for data. I can't remember what it was called, data something or other. But that might be something where we start. Yeah, where we start little by little. Here's the math. Here's the reading. Here's we knew who else does. Oh no, that was their curriculum. I was gonna say that was like Pondray, but I think that was their curriculum that was laid out that way. Coeur d'Alene is, of course, they've got Brazilian committees and all kinds of people and all that. But I think we can do it just little by little. As we start presenting, we can just add those pieces to the website.
Start it simple.
Right.
With just the statutory obligations and then kind of build on, this is what we're doing to meet it.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, even some of the pages that are there now, we could go to the top of the page, put the statute, cite the statute of what this thing meets, and then the people understand we are meeting the statute, here's the statute, and here's the data that goes with it.
Although that gives us somewhere too to, route people and reference that and send them there to see what.
That would be a good thing, Janelle, for us to look at is when if she's saying Coeur d'Alene is good, if we can look at Post Falls or Lake Hungary. And we could look at that and see like what part she's talking about, so that we can replicate that.
Yeah, and Post Falls, I think it's their 100, their policies are laid out a little bit different. They actually have, I forget what they call it, but their 100 policies are laid out as far as their plan, their vision, it's almost the narrative of the SIP, but a little bit more.
In there, where the
Yeah.
policies are?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
That's a Post Falls.
Yep, it's under the 100s, and I forget what they call it, might be the board vision and plan or something.
Okay.
And it's just 4 by fall, it's not a whole lot. The other question I had, but I know I don't want to keep everybody, and I know it's optional, but the literacy budget and the advising budget, are we still doing those?
Yes,
Okay.
and even though that it's optional for us to actually do it, we're required statutorily to report in the
Yeah.
spring how we spent the money.
Right,
So they just suggested that you
Keep doing it.
It's basically, all of it is going to salaries and benefits with about $6,000 that's left for literacy for little ones and some parent education, the summer book club, and some materials like our BOAC and things that we.
And the other one's all CCA stuff, right? The CCR.
Wait, there's no money for that, we don't have to do anything with that. I mean,
we just get that.
well, they get money to pay for those 2 positions.
Right, that's what I'm saying, it's in it all to CCAs.
Yeah.
So that whole money, we could spend more than they give us for the CCAs.
Oh, I don't doubt that, yeah, but it just referenced the budget, and I looked at their budget layout, and I thought, well, that would be cool if
They give us, so I can share with you
Yeah.
my report, because I had to fill that out.
yeah,
This last summer, it was
Yeah.
due by August, I think. So I can share that with you for what it looks like last year.
Yeah.
Did you show up with okay?
Yes,
That's
that's when I say you, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That's yes, all of you.
well, I was thinking that actually the best place for it is on the website. Because inevitably what happens is somebody comes to us, or they come to Chrissy or Janelle or whomever, and they're like, hey, I got this, we read this, where's this money, where's that? And we do have that, financials page, I don't know if that's the best suited place, yeah, but something like that, but yeah, that would be great, and I would like to see it too.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you right now, and then I can send it to Chrissy to see
Yeah.
if she can help me figure out where to put it.
Well, yeah, and then we'll get a thing, but we should figure out where we want it. Is the CIP gonna be under the board's page once they?
It has its own little,
And it has to be a 1-click to get
Yeah,
to it.
but should we put the literacy
Yeah.
budget with that CIPs?
That's what.
So pretty much to clarify, the board says thumbs down on all these numbers, but we don't really have a choice because of the diagnostic tools that are being used. And that this has kind of been the recommendation to put these numbers where they are based on our diagnostic tools, right? So we kind of are in a catch-22 where this has to be put out, even though it's not really our goals, even though this isn't really what we want.
nobody, I don't think anybody at this table.
No, I don't think anybody wants
Yeah.
that, yeah. It's just, we don't really have a choice.
Right.
But we will have these other informational goals
Yeah.
that we will
Exactly.
put, that
are
you
going to
guys can have to
Yes.
see the growth in all of these other areas that you guys.
Yes, that is a good diagnostic
Right.
tool. While this one's not a diagnostic tool, it's a, ooh, we've got to jump
That's
through.
exactly.
And so, yeah.
Information the state wants to see, and that's not necessarily what we want to look at for.
And you look at here, or if any legislators, that would be great, and school board members said, hey, you know, we did these foods, but boy, did we have these other things that we thought the legislators should really give us our own local control, because we feel like these would be great measures. And we could send them to you and show you how we're growing, but we have to do these two things and then this, so maybe.
So now we're taxing our children to the point of tears and exhaustion.
Yeah.
When they could be learning. I mean, how is that? Because you think that kind of stress that puts a human under, like that lays on you for a few days. I'd even say a
Well,
few
I'm not
weeks,
I'm
right?
not a huge test person anyways. I don't necessarily believe in all tests, I think, because they're skewed based on the person anyways.
True.
Not everybody's a test taker and.
Or the grades given, the environment.
Yeah, right, exactly.
There's a lot of variables.
Right, yeah, I'm, so, although I know there are people that are, highly data driven and like their charts and graphs and all that, but data doesn't tell the truth.
Not always, yeah.
Well, and it never tells the truth because you never really know what was behind the data.
Oh,
There's
yeah, how
certain
pure is
step-
it? How pure is your data?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So, but when people rely on data doesn't necessarily always tell the truth.
Yeah,
Depending on how
that's
the data is gathered,
That's a good point.
it's like a peer reviewed paper, you argue your point, I argue mine, you bring your peer reviewed papers, I'll bring mine.
It's
And
objective.
let's throw it out.
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah.
we could have a really good discussion like Dr. McCullough has been on about, which I shouldn't say.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
if you're seeing,
If you can get to it anymore, they're
Yeah.
trying to make it so you can't get to it anymore.
but it's happening in America as we speak. Who is that?
It sure is.
Yes. So, but anyways, okay, I'm fine with where, I'm glad we had the conversation, I'm glad everybody indulged me and came back.
No, I think it's important.
Yeah.
Really,
It needed to be had, and it needed to be known that we are not okay with this.
Yeah.
This SIP plan is not what anybody here
Right.
wants, and I'm gonna guess teachers
Well,
probably
it's
don't even
not-
want that,
yeah.
based on that. So I think the whole district is giving this SIP plan a big thumbs down, but it's a hoop we have to jump through to get the funding, so we'll just do it, which is so sad. I mean, what a waste of time, taxpayer money, energy.
That's taken a lot of time.
Yeah.
What a waste.
If you can email us, what you have for measures that we discussed tonight. Let's see.
We'll email you the list of ideas that we have for measures,
So that.
in addition to what we already put in here, or do you want us to include the optional ones we put in here in that list?
What you're presently
Well,
using, that when we put the teachers on top, right? Like, what would make more for the teachers? Is that what you mean? I think what she was trying to say is, do you want the whole gamut, like everything that's available, or just what we're using that we could use?
No, I don't want anything that's in the SIP plan because that's.
These things that you guys.
Yeah, I want this stuff that we've.
It's more like
Relatively
curriculum based measures.
What I want to clarify though is on that list, in this SIP, we did put iReady, ELA, which I would put on the list, I guess, and so that's what I'm asking is, the things that I think are valuable that we did put in here, I would put on that list.
Okay.
Yes.
But not the
But
standard.
not
Yeah, that's
the
all.
state, not
I
the
think that's
state.
what she's
Okay.
And then we have a good start to that.
And I did just share with you the worksheet from the state for the literacy funding. And there are two tabs at the bottom. One is the directions tab. Don't look at that one. It's the actual funding distribution worksheet.
Okay. And then we need to pick a date within the near future to move forward with the visionary rainbow plan. Okay. Because we do have to get to the point where we've got the superintendent's evaluation data out so that she knows what she's achieving for this year. We can't keep playing. No.
Are we gonna have, in the past when we've done that, we've put out invitations to business owners and community members. It was a very large group.
To create our district vision, the
rainbow plan.
our visionary rainbow
Yes.
plan.
In the past, we've had lots of community members participate. I'm not saying that's how we have to do it, just that's what we have.
It's an interesting.
I sent
idea.
them the picture, the whole document.
30 people.
But that hasn't happened in a couple of years, that was
There's been a lot of staff.
like 4 years,
classified,
3 years ago.
certified. It's a big
Well, I think it would be good for us to obviously include those people. I don't know that we need to initially, because I think the board probably needs to figure out what their overarching, like this discussion we
Some
had.
of the framework.
Right, exactly.
You can
And
build the
then, right,
And
and
they
then,
can color inside the lines.
right,
Or,
you know.
Big man clouds of birds and stuff.
They can add to it. We'll start
But
with
we
a
need to
page
have
and they can
a
add to it.
layout to build on. And so I think if we can get together and prep that layout.
Right.
And maybe put a few components here, there and everywhere. there, then that second meeting would be when we would put the invitation on, and if nobody shows up, then nobody shows up.
Oh, that's not.
You never know, I mean, sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
I just don't want to get into the whole ice cream thing. Have you guys ever heard about the ice cream study? Where they looked to see how many choices people can actually handle. The average human, right? Because people think they can handle all kinds of choices. They actually can only handle 3. 3 was it. And there was no way that they could, every time they added another choice, it became another back and forth until, when they aggregate what the number was, when it was just complete brain burnout. That's what I want to try and avoid. Yeah, and here's 500 trillion choices and 500 voices coming at you.
Or there's just too much and then there's no decisions.
Right, exactly. I think that with, who we have, who are there all the time, and then with the teachers and maybe with the principals, what they're saying, sort of go down the, or go up the hierarchy, pull down thing too. Sorry, it should be from the bottom up.
We're gonna float up.
Yeah, yeah. It is.
So as far as this goes, for Thursday's board meeting purposes, as long as we know that these are where they should be, is it ready to upload as is?
I believe so. Yeah.
We're putting those as those numbers though, right?
Yeah,
The
we didn't finish
73,
this
We
one.
didn't finish that.
So they just, I think what the board suggests.
Just
to match.
Well, hold on a second.
That's what I have.
That was Randy's
that was
recommendation.
mine.
Is everybody else in agreement with that? Or as this is the LEA's chosen target, I mean, it's the people with their boots on the ground, they chose these numbers based on the performance of last year. Yeah. Do we want to respect what they've chosen, or do we want to tell them raise the bar? Because I mean, Lisa's saying that, they looked at the numbers, they added and rounded up from 2%, which, I don't know if that's a sizable portion or if it's too small of a portion, or, I don't know.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't wanna step on toes for, like you said, boots on the ground, that's not,
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem raising the number, but I'm also not in the class and I don't know what they did last year.
that's true.
I just know that it wasn't, our goal wasn't reached because we lowered the number. So.
I think given, to begin with, I think kudos to everything they went through last year, getting where they got.
Right.
And I think this year, with the new stuff happening in the district, with the curriculum and the, having to shuffle the classes early and whatever else might come, I mean, I'm fine with leaving them there. To me, it's sort of a little
No, I'm
brain
fine with
break
that.
thing, I
Yeah.
don't wanna put more.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's.
No, I know we're saying leave them the way they were.
Leave them where
Yeah.
you have them. Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that too, I don't think we should try to raise the.
Well, I have no problem raising it.
I
But
think we
considering what went into
Should
that.
respect what they
Yeah.
have come up with and let them do their job.
And I know it looks like we're going down because, but it's hard, I don't know why they took out our actual, like what we actually did, because if we could put those numbers in, then you could see that we're actually pushing the bar up.
Could we add that?
Side by side.
Could we add that in before we put it on our website?
Yeah, we can.
Can we
I
put
mean,
in a column
No,
that
I
says
don't know,
action?
we have to actually submit something
have
that
to be
is
the exact.
approved by the state.
Yeah.
Can we just put it outside on the next column, like actual and the target? It just makes no sense to me. Can't-
We could do what's required of the state, and then in your visionary one, you can put that extra column, but the state does say you can
It is
add
just a
goals, but they
tool.
don't say metrics.
According to the state board, they say this is just your template. These are what's required, but you can do whatever.
I think it's just minimal. They
Yeah.
could add it. I think.
I would
we should
feel
add that.
better if we put a column between those two
Yeah.
that showed 2021 performance targets and then 2021 actual
Actuals.
performance.
Yeah.
And then our new targets, because then it will show
Right.
that we were close and we're pushing a little bit further this year.
I think that's a good idea. So
Yeah,
this
I
is what
agree.
they state, because this is what they need.
No, we put the whole.
No,
thing
we're
in.
putting it in there.
We
Yeah.
can do that, yeah.
Section 2 data is
It's working
required.
in the
but
minimum
then-
wage, give us a maximum.
Yeah, see, that's what the state board
And
said.
if they don't like it, just tell us they don't like it, but
Yeah.
they say that it's just a template, and they say these are what you have to have, but feel free to, they say you can create your own template as long as it includes these things.
Proficient,
So it's
uh,
just like
actual
Right.
proficiency or proficiency, whatever.
Do we keep the LEHOs on?
Yeah, because that, we're adding that,
LEAs? Okay.
but we are choosing to put that column in.
Well, yeah,
District
I don't
two.
think we would put the LHOs on,
I know,
it's
we
just
put the
actual
actuals.
numbers. So, I mean,
Yeah, not,
yeah,
you just like that.
Yeah, we're not choosing which numbers we're putting in.
Right, exactly.
Because I choose the highest.
It's just actuals.
I choose 100.
that's, yeah.
Performance performance, yeah. So.
I think this will tell our story a little bit better.
And that way, when people do look at it, aside from the fact that we're giving them another document to look at with our missionary rainbow plan, they can at least see, okay, so this was their target, they didn't hit it. Oh, well, they were less, but look what they're doing now, they're raising the bar. So it tells your story without words.
And our visionary rainbow plan is gonna capture the essence of our kids. 'Cause every single number up there represents little people, you know, or big people, but they're kids. And so the other, having the other part, I feel like will give a more grander picture of what all things that we're doing and what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, yeah.
That 55% makes me sad. I know it does you guys too. I'm like, wow, only half.
Thank you for
noticing that
too.
Yes.
So just require,
When you see the state.
So kindergarten was 67.
Just make sure. What is, oh my goodness, like how?
first grade is 68. Second grade is 71. And third grade is 71.
And then on your comprehensive thing, what's the fourth grade ISAP?
Because we didn't.
Well, but we do have what our actual proficiency was last year.
We didn't set targets last year.
But,
so
there
we
was. So it can, so it will at least show why our percentage, this target this year is 55. By showing that actual.
You could just say it's a comprehensive data analysis.
Oh.
Are we done? Should I charge you on
Yes,
the
I know.
report?
Oh,
Are we
She would.
done? How far?
I don't think so. I think we'll be done with
We're putting these out.
Yeah, it's all.
Because I don't.
Better that than
They're
other
shutting
things. Right.
down to do this stuff.
Is this or whiskey? You pick.
Anyway.
Okay, so
Just-
you
Exciting.
for last year,
Yeah.
Chrissy, last year's fourth grade percentage was 52%.
whoa.
We have a good idea.
That'll work. Yeah, there we go. There's our actual. How do I get it? Because you do 0.52? Oh, yeah.
And the
Yeah.
ELA is the same too. Just pull it down, it's the same exact number, 52.
Okay, so now we have to fix those. I just put point though?
You should be able to.
No,
It's not formatted correctly.
Yeah, use that.
can I do that?
There you go.
Thank you. Learn something new today.
So did I.
It's always handy.
Not on that one, but on the one you taught me earlier.
So
What else did she
hopefully,
need? What else do you need? Did you do the blue one at the top?
Okay, which one is this? Is that all I said? Because I'm on.
If you can say it out loud, then we know.
Math I said.
Okay, so,
Eight.
third, what grade we?
Eighth grade math.
Math I said, eighth grade.
Wouldn't it all be on the
Is
report cards?
35%.
This is an NA.
Okay.
We didn't measure the adequate growth rate last year.
And then
Is it eighth grade ELA?
ELA.
58.
Sixth grade math is 37.
Sixth grade ELA is 49.
So on that one, we did go down, huh? We did. Set our roll down a little bit on that.
On the math, on the eighth grade ELA ISAT, our goal, our measurable performance target was 53.6. We beat it at 58, but now we're dropping
Oh,
down to
no, we should be at 60 there.
At what one?
The eighth grade ELA I sat,
That's
the
above
the target,
over.
not that one. Go
Yep.
over to your, yeah, that one.
That's 60.
It should be 60. Everything else look,
Now, on the
that's a
Sixth
significant
math.
growth that we're asking for.
Yeah, on the sixth grade math, we had 48.7, but we came in 10% lower, and now we're raising it to 50%.
Who came?
Okay. Are you sure it's not supposed to be 40?
I think we were actually looking at the 48.7 and not at the actual number, so.
Oh, okay.
Are we 40?
It is,
I
I
like the other one better.
have no problem, but it's, if you're looking at 38,
But remember when they told you it's the state training.
It needs to
Make
be
it attainable.
It's a 3% growth, and across the district, our teachers would tell you that when we're talking about unfinished learning, math is where we are struggling the
Well,
most. So
eighth grade math, you had from 35 to 44.
that's another big jump.
Right.
So is the ELA, sixth grade ELA
that's supposed to be
from 49 to 62? Big.
Yeah, I think we were not looking at, for some reason, we were not looking at actuals, we were looking at that column, which is why I think this middle column is important, because you have to remind yourself.
Well, because are they
Not
sixth grade, the actuals, because they used to be in there.
So I think we have to adjust.
I think that should be 40.
Why don't you pick a common, like, are we gonna do 4%, 3%, 4%, 5%? What's our expected growth? And then do it for all of them so we have some consistency when we explain it to teachers.
Of why, that way they're not just kind of arbitrary. Oh, let's say 40. Oh, let's say.
So
Well,
just,
I'm
not a
gonna-
rounding off.
yeah, I'm gonna look at, so I just want to. Look at our enrollment. I just want to see if we raised it 5%, how many kids are we talking? We're actually talking number of kids instead of just a random number that we're pulling out of the air.
so we're at 47-26.
I know, so I was just gonna look at like sixth grade.
Yeah, that grade.
So at sixth grade, we have 329 kids this year. We said 5% of them are gonna grow. That's we're talking about 16 kids moving from basic to proficient, in addition to maintaining the kids who are currently there. I think that's doable, 16. I don't know, what do you think? And we have to keep the kids who are there, can't let any of them slide backwards, but at 16 out of 329.
I'd say go for it.
I would feel better if we raised all of them 5%.
So the first one, so that would be 63.
No.
The third one,
No,
so 40, so 63%. And then you would be 42%.
So those weren't decided by the teachers, they're decided by you?
And we just really were trying to be gentle. But when you look at actual numbers. You know, if we actually want to push forward.
We have to look at the actual numbers. If you want to go down to the literacy and proficiency.
But, her kids have breast cancer, she has no more tumors.
Heck, yeah.
She was stage four
right there.
and they were like, we're not even operating, we're not doing nothing, we're going now. And she just got all of her results back.
Wow.
What'd you do?
Sounds like they gave up on it.
Radiation
Oh,
and
okay.
everything, yeah. But she has no tumors, no nothing, but they thought for sure she was, it was too much.
Is it your sister?
Yeah, no, it's the kids' Sam, their dad's, sister-in-law. Yeah, that's awesome, yeah, wow, so happy for her.
Becky D's looking at me, because I went to the doctor yesterday for my annual checkup.
On her birthday.
On my birthday,
Oh,
so I
yeah.
obviously did it, because I was like, you can't tell me bad news on my birthday. So I got all my stuff, my scans, everything came back clean, so I'm good to go.
Awesome.
Heck, yeah.
That's cool, yeah.
And then my husband forgot my birthday.
That's where you just go buy a big piece of furniture or something you've been really wanting. Well, what's this for? It's my birthday, remember? No, you didn't. That's why I bought it.
I have to for your husband because I've actually forgotten my husband's birthday. It was a thing. I mean, like,
And
it
you
was a
didn't
thing.
buy a boat? That took a lot of restraint.
Well, one of them's in college, but not a single male in my family remember.
So that's the difference with having girls. Girls never forget your birthday.
Because nobody, I mean, my husband was like, hey, maybe we've gone maybe you want to make a cake tonight? And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? And he kept dropping these hints, and so then I'm like, weird. I mean, this is totally weird for you. I'm like, shoot. Happy birthday.
I'm gonna go make a cake now.
Yeah, and the kids were like, oh, happy birthday, Daddy.
How are you gonna make up for it?
It's gonna take a while. But you know what, the good news was, it's all good.
So these numbers.
So those go 5, 2.
We just entertained each other with all kinds of things.
Do you mind? Are you in this?
There we go. Nobody's on the whole time. If he's from now, they can watch it.
Yeah.
Right, watch it later.
So do we want to maintain these at 5% as well? I mean, these are smaller, well, not smaller class sizes, but numbers.
Well, then we should look historically what have we been looking at.
Well, I was just looking at, and it's really hard to do a building, so.
If we're looking just at all the red is all the people have gone down.
You know, what's interesting as you're looking at that is if you look from like kindergarten first and then the second, it goes kindergarten's higher, first grade's a drop, and then it goes up in second grade. Which makes sense because the first graders are learning all those big skills that they're having to learn.
But also there's a new test. I put you a comment, but you didn't write back, but I also don't think it should show red when it's a brand new test in spring 2019. I think it needs to be baseline to start again. So I took the red off of that one.
Perfect.
But everybody went down for,
Is compiling it this way, make it easy for this, does it
Yes.
help you?
so,
Really hard to. We've only been doing this and this new IRI since 2019,
And
and
then
so
we
then
limit-
COVID,
right,
and then last year coming off of COVID, so it's hard to really know.
Well, I think then universally, I would be comfortable with these smaller grades at doing at least a 3% increase.
Yeah.
So,
I like that.
that's 71, 74.
And then, just so the board kind of.
Your middle one is wonky.
Just,
I like it that way.
yeah, just so the board kind of, has some understanding about primary reading. For most kids, it really does take them until 3rd grade to show their reading proficiency, because every year there's just so much that goes into it. So our goal has always been that by the end of 3rd grade, at least 85% of our kids are going into 4th grade as proficient readers. That's kind of what the.
So do you want that 74 to say
I just,
80? Is that what you're saying?
that's what we're working toward. And before we changed the IRI, we consistently hit that at a higher rate than 85%. This new IRI is just a little bit.
She has 71, but it's 72 for 3rd grade, spring 2020. That's,
The actuals right here.
yeah, that's 72.
So it should be 75.
Am I reading this right? Where did you guys get yours? It's 66, 67,
No, I
71 and 72.
I actually just went down to the actual, to this, and divided the number of kids by the number of kids proficient to get that.
Why don't they have the districts, break it out? How else to say it, but gender. Because the bottom line is, like you're saying with 3rd grade, we know psychologically and through neuroscience and everything that boys' brains aren't even ready to read and comprehend until between 8 and 10 years old, preferably 10.
Just in the 4th grade.
This particular assessment, we could pull, you can pull that demographics, we could pull, students that are on the 504, we could do rate, you could do any and all of those things, it has a.
I just think it's sort of
Yeah,
unfair to
pull
lump
that
everybody
demographic.
into one. You know, I don't think it's really accurate.
Yeah, and the other thing with students with disability, I know that we need to get that caught up, but I think it's apples and oranges
Right.
also. If you put economically disadvantaged, I mean, there's just so many different.
Yeah, when you look at it,
variables.
you can't look at a kindergarten who comes in pretty much nonverbal, very, very low verbal skills. The growth that child has to make compared to a child who's coming out of a home where both parents have some education, they actually talk to their child.
Right.
So there are lots and lots of variables that go into all of this.
And you have some of the really bright kids who are out of the box thinkers, the creative, innovative, and just wrapping your brain around with the coding and the phonemes, that hum, and it's just hard for them, and it has no indication of how smart they are.
Right.
But just the job of just reading words and letters and sounds is really difficult. So you start to see in 1st grade, kindergarten, at the end of kindergarten, 1st grade, they really, really struggle because so much of it is phoneme specific.
Yeah.
But then as you start to see us putting in context a little bit more, they do a little bit better, and then it's like the light just comes on, you know?
Yeah.
Again, back to Lisa's point of, you really see, I think, a better indication of where kids are going to be long-term at the end of 3rd grade. Because it seems like that's when it all kind of comes together. They might isolate and have difficulties, but then just the light bulb comes on at that point. It's a culminating experience. But we want 100% across.
That is the goal. It'd be nice if we beat all the time.
I would just like to be there.
Awesome too.
I would like to see the report be consistent enough that we can compare it from year to year, but that's why we're gonna do our own.
Right.
Nice. That's right.
And I don't think we'll go in and say that because it's okay.
Yeah, so let me
Especially
see.
these days.
That's when I say changes in the
How it
acronyms.
happens, because sometimes it'll be something weird, so I might just have to make it a 5th page. Sign or something like that.
Yeah.
Browse, and you can check it out.
Browse.
Okay, it is 7:24.
Yeah.
Somebody will say this.
Well, you start giving me a gap.
Oh, yeah, I'm still in it.
Oh, I didn't know why you could be happy.